So thanks for those that are standing in the back. We want to make this really dynamic. We're going to have a chance to meet our panelists, learn some information, and then we'll have a chance for Q&A at the end too. So log away in the back of your mind any questions that you have, because we've got two experts up here that'll be able to share information with us. And I'm going to introduce them first, and then we'll kind of ground this conversation in some of the facts around youth homelessness in our country and in our state and city. But let's meet them first. So to my right is Erin Casey. Erin is the Director of Programs at My Friend's Place, which is a local nonprofit in Hollywood that works with, over 1,000 young people that are experiencing homelessness ages 12 to 22. So a huge swath there. To the right of her is Juwan Sullivan, who is an actor, writer, producer, who has experienced houselessness himself, who's going to tell us what his journey was in navigating those challenges as a young adult in Los Angeles. So thank you to both of you for being with us today. Your expertise is just invaluable. And now we're going to start with some facts, because we always want to make sure that we learn something new along with service. And I'm a data junkie, so I always go looking for numbers. So I'm just going to, first of all, it would be really helpful to frame what is homeless youth? How does that get categorized? And I learned something new today. We always learn something new when I was talking to Erin. So California, so the way that the California Department of Education defines homeless youth, I'm going to read it, refers to unaccompanied minors ages 12 through 17 who are living apart from their parents or legal guardians, and young adults ages 18 through 24 who are experiencing unstable or inadequate living situations, such as sleeping on friends' couches, staying in shelters, living under bridges, abandoned buildings, and on the streets. So that's how the Department of Education in California defines homeless youth. I just found out, talking to Erin, that is not the way that HUD defines homeless youth. They don't count individuals that are sharing spaces or living on couches. So we know that even these numbers that I'm going to give you, we know that they're off, because even our own agencies in the state and on the federal level aren't using the same definitions to count what is homeless, to define what is homeless. So, okay, so now keep in mind that the numbers that I'm going to share, these are government numbers. So the reality is that it's not less than this, but it's likely a lot more. And I think it's really helpful to frame. So what the US government says, the current count, so this is last year's count, 2022, is that there are between 1.6 and 1.7 million individuals ages 12 to 17 experiencing homelessness. That was in 2022. That's a 12% increase since the start of COVID. And it's just continuing to climb. And that of that number, between 300,000 and 400,000 are expected to be homeless on any given day or night. Next set of numbers. Individuals ages 18 to 19, okay, now get a load of the range here, somewhere between 80,000 and 170,000. So maybe 80,000, maybe double that or more, individuals ages 18 to 19, and that means about 5% of the homeless population nationwide is between 18 and 19 years old. And between the ages of 18 or 20 to 24, somewhere between 124,000 individuals to 250,000 individuals. That's how hard it is to establish a realistic count. And I know Juwan is going to share some of that with us as well. It's incredibly difficult to pin down numbers, because oftentimes as individuals get older, they camouflage well. That was a word that Erin used. People don't want to be identified. And so we're not entirely sure how many individuals out there between the ages of 18 and 24 are experiencing homelessness. These are just the ones that are currently participating in government services that we know of. And in fact, we were even talking earlier about the Los Angeles area homeless count, which we'll remind you of that later. That's a great way to volunteer. It's essential. The way that you're trained when you participate in the homeless count is it's just visual. So if you see a tent, you count that as one person. If you see a vehicle that maybe someone lives in, you count that as a person living in that vehicle. So even those numbers are likely a dramatic undercount. So just to kind of frame that, so that number of individuals, so just in California, California has the largest percentage, population of individuals between the ages of 18 to 24 and under 18 that are experiencing homelessness, the count last year was that there's approximately 200,000 young people under the age of 18. And we don't really know how many 18 to 24-year-olds. This is California's like, I don't know, thousands, tens of thousands, we're not really sure, experiencing homelessness. So in context, that's like if the entire school district of San Diego Unified, that's 110,000 students, and the entire school district of Fresno Unified, that's 72,000 students. Imagine if all of them were homeless. That's how many homeless individuals under the age of 18. So school-age students that we have in California. So that's the reality. And it's why it's so important that we do things like this, that we understand the numbers and that we become those change agents, taking those facts with us when we leave. But we really want to dig into more stories. So how does that happen?
So my homeless experience began when there was a breakdown in my family. And it started from my grandmother passing away, with also my parents splitting, which kind of left me just honestly on my own to fend for myself. And throughout that time in my adolescence, my teenage years, I just was trying to figure out life while also having the foundation ripped from under me from losing my grandmother, my parents, not being together, and me being somewhere in the middle, just trying to figure out where do I go, who am I, what do I do? And I just had bouts of having stability, not having stability, and again, just trying to figure out what does life look like for me, being an unhoused young adult who's trying to do the right thing, but I don't have the right tools, resources, and support around me to give me and to facilitate the life that I need to be, as productive as I want it to be. And I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Atlanta, outside of Atlanta, so fairly normal life, but my parents separated. Moved in with my grandmother. She, was taking care of myself and my younger sister and my mom. And when she passed away, I felt like that was the breakdown of the family unit. And me and my mom had a strained relationship in my teenage years. And once my grandmother passed away, I was kind of just on my own. Around the ages of 16 and 21, 16 was when my grandmother passed away, and I would say that was when life just completely shifted. I don't have a huge family. It's really just me and my sisters, and I have an older sister who's 8 years older than me, and she was the one that took me in, but she also was a young adult. I think at the time she was in her mid-20s, so she couldn't fully play the role of parent to me, so it was a lot on her. So there were times where there was a strain in our relationship because she had this burden now on her of a teenager to take care of and raise. So there was a point where I did have to leave school, high school, and get a job to work because she's like, hey, I can't take care of you. This isn't my responsibility, and there's only so much I can do. So I did have to leave school at 16, 17, get a full-time job to be able to contribute. But then there were times where, as a young adult, I was figuring out life. There were times where I was making not the best decisions and our relationship was strained, and she was like, you gotta go. So those were the moments where I had to figure it out. I would couch surf, and just that roller coaster of instability would continue to just go up and down, up and down. It was such a traumatic experience that I'm still working through as a 34-year-old, of just having that foundation ripped from up under you, especially having a fairly normal life. When I was 23, I moved to Los Angeles, and that cycle kind of happened again. Again, not having a foundation to build upon, not having family and support, and then being a little ignorant of how expensive it was out here in Los Angeles, and coming out here pursuing a dream. I fell into that cycle again. So
I'm glad. Thank you for sharing your story. We know that there are common reasons that youth will fall into homelessness or housing insecurity, and the breakdown of the family unit is a really common one. So that's one of those myths that we need to unseat as well, is that, and we've heard this before, we've all heard it, that a lot of the people that are homeless youth, that maybe they were runaways. Some are, but that's a rare reason that people start on that journey. It's oftentimes the breakdown of the family unit, or sometimes a feeling of unsafety within the family unit where people feel like they might be safer on the street than at home. And so thank you for sharing that. And then we'll circle back around to your story again as well. So Erin, you work with a direct service provider in a really high needs, high concentration area in Los Angeles. Can you tell us a little bit about My Friend's Place? And then also, what brought you to working with them? I know you've worked with them for a really long time. So what has your journey been in working with a direct service provider?
I have the honor of serving an organization in Hollywood called My Friend's Place. We have been serving the Hollywood community for nearly 36 years, and we are a crisis resource drop-in center for youth and young adults impacted by housing instability and homelessness. I think what brought me into this work, I was sharing earlier with someone, I had the privilege, and I really want to name that as a privilege, of doing a graduate program at UCLA in social work. I'm a really proud social worker. And part of that experience is we would have a module where we toured Skid Row. And I was walking the streets of Skid Row for 10 seconds before I really just made this very personal declaration that so long as I lived in Los Angeles, that I would work in the space of solving homelessness. So My Friend's Place, we are a crisis resource drop-in center for youth and young adults experiencing homelessness or housing instability, ages 12 to 24, and actually we've just expanded our services to age 30 because we were seeing that young people were turning 24, aging out of the youth system of care, having to go into the adult system of care, and just being completely lost. So we are extending our services with the hope that we can lean into the connections and the relationships that we build to help young people really navigate into that adult system. So Hollywood is really, Hollywood and Venice, Santa Monica is generally thought to be some of the places that young people will gravitate towards because they're service enriched. In the past 6-7 years, the county has really tried to have services in all of the service planning areas, but they're not equitable at this point. So Hollywood continues to have a lot of services. And we don't, I do want to say my expertise is not in the experience of family homelessness with minors or with children. We serve about 2% 12 to 17-year-olds, and those are largely folks who are not attached to family units and oftentimes running from a foster care placement because that foster care placement is not honoring of their identity, particularly if they are someone who identifies as LGBTQIA. So I've been on the front lines of addressing youth homelessness in Los Angeles for the past 20 years, and I think we cannot talk about this issue without really talking about the root causes. What is true for me and what I hope to be true as we really think about this issue is that homelessness is the biggest social, racial, and economic justice issue of our time. The other part that's true is this is a human-made problem, and the only thing that is good about that is that it also means that humans can solve this issue. So when we talk about what is causing youth homelessness, we have to be talking about racial injustice, economic injustice. This nation has not yet adopted a housing justice philosophy, this really true belief that everybody deserves a safe place to live, and it is only when we have safe places to live that we can also thrive. One of the biggest feeders of youth homelessness is the foster care system. So we have to also, when we think about how are young people becoming homeless, we think about it in two general terms, right? A breakdown in the family system or a breakdown in the system such as foster care, juvenile justice. But I think a really interesting thing is finally happening in Los Angeles where we're no longer divorcing the issue of homelessness with poverty and the way in which the city has become unaffordable for a lot of us. But we're never going to see this, the beauty about youth homelessness is if we do it right, we really can prevent long-term homelessness. But we have to invest way more in prevention, and we have to invest way more in families to be able to live in the city.
And to tack onto that, the concept of foster youth. So I think probably everyone knows that when we talk about aging out of foster care, it's either when an individual turns 18 or graduates from high school. So if you graduate from high school at 17, you age out of, you can't stay in group homes anymore. And so in fact, in California, 1 in 4 individuals who age out of foster care become homeless. Now Joanne, I want to come back to you, particularly because of the age range in which you were navigating housing insecurity and houselessness. why do we think it's so difficult to get a count of individuals if they're not involved in an institution? Like if they're not being counted by a school or counted, by an organization, why is it so hard to get a count? And we hear that a lot too, because we're going to be going out and doing direct outreach. And you might be thinking, okay, well now wait a minute. If there are tens of thousands of homeless young people in Los Angeles, why am I not seeing them? Why is that?
Yeah.
Do you think?
I'll speak from my experience. For me, I think even when I was experiencing homelessness, I had a misconception of what it meant to be homeless. I had, the idea that if you're homeless, you made terrible decisions, you were probably on drugs, alcoholism, that whole streamline of thought that we have. I just didn't see myself as the extreme cases that we sometimes see as, people who are drug addicts or who are dealing with alcoholism. I just looked at myself as a young guy whose foundation was ripped from him, and it's on me to figure it out. There was a sense of pride of, I don't want anybody to know what I'm going through. So I was very good at hiding that I was homeless. I think coming from my upbringing and having a really strict grandmother, I knew how to just put everything together, So I figured out this system of how to maintain an image where people wouldn't look at me and say, oh, that guy's homeless. For the most part, I walked around with a duffel bag and a book bag, and I would use my money to go wash my clothes and take showers. So I just looked like a college student on the street, just maybe commuting, but I had my whole life in those bags. And there were days where I wouldn't shower for 3-4 days at a time. There were days where I didn't eat. And it got to a point where some days my entire day would just be focused on how do I keep this image of not looking like I'm deteriorating and my inner world reflecting outwardly. So I think a lot of people can get caught in that, and we miss those people because they're just trying to maintain there's some dignity and some sense of pride within themselves, and they just are blending in. So I was one of those people that were blending in at the bus stop or at a coffee shop with their computer out that you just think is a regular person, but they're really just trying to figure out how am I going to make it through this day. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's such a good reminder of that we hear it from the time that we're little, right? Like you shouldn't judge people based on their appearances, but truly, you really don't know what someone is going through. And I want to ask you the same question about what you're finding about why is it difficult to plug people into services. But when you were mentioning you had a schema in place, like you would take showers at the Korean spa. One of our panelists, Ezzy, he's actually going to be coming in the afternoon and speaking to the veterans experience. I remember him saying one time that he had learned that if he folded his clothes, if he could get his clothes rinsed out and reasonably dry, if he folded them a certain way and he slept on them, he could get a really nice crease on his pants and on his shirts. And so you wouldn't, if he went for job interviews or went for services, you wouldn't think, well, that's someone that woke up in a tent this morning, because he was working very hard to maintain that dignity and wasn't going to have that conversation with someone unless he had to. So yeah, we just can't judge. Now, Aaron, what about you all? You search such a wide range of individuals. What have you found or experienced? Are there challenges in getting people through the door to get them plugged into services?
Yeah, what we acknowledge as a team every day is it is an act of bravery anytime a young person takes a chance on us and walks through our door. Mm-hmm. It is for any of us, right? Who finds it really easy to ask for help? Not me, right? And we're perfect strangers. And this is life or death kind of help, right? And so many of the young people that do take that are brave enough to walk through the doors, they have been let down by adults in their life. Sometimes the people that were meant to take care of them were the ones that harmed them the most, right? So when we think about, so many young people who experience homelessness have also had really complex trauma in their early growing up formative years. And what that does, our ability to trust is so, for anyone to be able to receive services, you really do have to have a positive experience with trusting someone. And that is a privilege. If you have that, if you have felt cared for in your life, if you have felt that someone in your life was trustworthy, that is a privilege. And it's a privilege that a lot of people do not have.
So the conversations that our team are having all the time with young people, So I guess what I would want to say is part of our safe haven model, what works about our programming, right, is that any second spent inside our doors is a safer second than spent on the streets. So young people are, managing all of just the risks of being a person living on the streets. Those are health risks, right? Those are obviously safety risks. But young people often can be, there's a lot of predatory behavior that is targeting young people, and that includes, more formalized sex trafficking, but also just the predatory behavior of being asked to do anything that you don't want to do, but you need to do it to ensure your own survival.
Here's the truth of it. For every young person who is experiencing homelessness on the street, I think the stat, and the bed count might have changed recently, but for every 300 young people, there's one bed. So just by taking that brave step and coming into a service center like ours and saying, hey, I'm on the streets, I need help, more often than not, we're doing exactly what Joanne said. We're saying our doors closed, we're a drop-in center, right? So we provide day shelter, we don't have overnight shelter. It is in our strategic plan to own and operate our own housing. But at the end of the day, when we can't get someone a bed, we are talking about the buses that run 24 hours. We were talking about the McDonald's that are open 24 hours. We're giving away movie tickets, so you can spend at least 4 hours at night safe inside a movie theater. But we are not, Los Angeles can do better. We're not doing better. But just asking for help does not mean that the resources are there.
So if you see young people that are sitting inside of a movie theater or have been at McDonald's all day, we cannot judge. You have no idea what their experience is. We want to make sure, we want to get everybody back to work, and we want to make sure that we have a chance to get some questions from the audience. So I want to ask two quick questions, and then we'll send the mic out to the audience. So what is one thing that you wish that people knew about individuals that are youth that are experiencing homelessness? And what is one thing that you think that anybody could do to be supportive? So one thing you wish people knew, and one thing that anybody could do.
I think if a young person that I've had the honor of working with were in this seat instead of me, what they would say is that they would want you to know that, I'm getting emotional, that they are striving humans, that they need this to be a circumstance, a time in their life that does not define them, that it doesn't define them, right? We are not defined by the most awful, terrible things that happen to us. I think they would also want you to know that, and Joanne, listening to your story, I'm just so reminded about this. What they have gone through and how they have survived it make them some of the smartest, fiercest leaders that our community can hope for. And so if you're in places where you can hire young people who can name, like, oh, I don't have that experience, but have you ever survived 10 days in Los Angeles without a place to live? Because I promise you I can do that job.
Yeah.
You have got to be so creative and persistent and self-confident to survive a night on the streets. And that transfers into employability skills in a way that I don't think that we give enough credit to. That's one of the struggles with young people experiencing homelessness is, when we talk about people living in poverty, like so much of that poverty is the lack of social connections, right? So they don't have the connections, but they absolutely have the skills. They just need someone to give them a shot.
Yeah.
And the ways in which we stigmatize poverty, the ways in which we stigmatize all sorts of things, right? We're not giving these young people shots. And given the right opportunity, they can take it from there. They really can. And we just have to show up for them and give them the right opportunity. There's lots of ways that you can help us specifically, and I left some material behind. But I think what I would want to say, especially because there's so many young faces here, part of this is we have to change the public dialogue and we have to change the public perception, and that is what all of you can do, right? And I'm not asking you to go toe-to-toe with someone who is, talking disparagingly about homelessness, but seed planting. Just end a conversation by saying, but I wonder the role of trauma in that. Gosh, don't you wonder what that person has been through? What the slogan that the amazing colleagues that I get to do this work with, right? We all know, and we know it like in our core, and Juwan's story tells this too, most of us are one paycheck and one family member away from being in this experience ourselves. And that's not lost on us. It's a grandmother, right? That is so often the story that we hear at my friend's place of how people entered into homelessness. Their one family member that raised them died, right? Think of the one person that you count on and think of not having them. What would any of us do, right? And in a city like Los Angeles, this is not an easy city. It is not an affordable city. Some of the strategies and interventions that are working in other cities to solve homelessness, they do not work here because we do not have, it is not affordable. It just isn't. So seed plant, whenever you have the opportunity to just slightly try to move the needle on how someone thinks about the issue, that's what I would really recommend. Be an ambassador. You don't have to go toe to toe, just plant some seeds.
One thing I wish people knew and would do would be to be ferocious with your kindness. Being ferociously kind is a term that I love and I try to live and abide by. I feel when people go above and beyond and even sometimes inconvenience themselves to convenience you out of the kindness and the generosity of their heart. For me, I feel that was the tool that is innately in us that we have to foster and nurture, that others use to pull me out of that dark pit of isolation, of not having that support. It was the kindness of people that made me feel safe enough to share, to be vulnerable, and to be honest about where I was and not, be doused in the shame and the condemnation of feeling like I just didn't have anyone to lean on. It was the kindness of people that was an invitation for me to lean on to people. And I just feel like that's such a valuable tool as humans. And not even a tool, but just an act of being, a way of life. Is just going above and beyond for people. And above and beyond sometimes can be you're walking in a gas station and you're going to pump gas, but you see someone who is asking for change and going above and beyond and not just giving them $1, but maybe getting them a sandwich or some chips, some coffee or water, and just doing that little extra that reminds somebody that I am seen, I am valued, I am heard, and I do matter. I think that's being ferociously kind and just loving on people in the way that we should all be loved.